Danger might be closer than you think. Before we begin, like this video, comment where and what time you're watching from, and subscribe for more chilling stories. Now turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive into the unknown. I was 28 at the time, working remotely as a freelance designer, which gave me the flexibility to travel during the off-season. My girlfriend Liv and I had been dating for about a year, and we'd gotten into the habit of taking weekend camping trips. Nothing fancy, just us, a borrowed tent, and a second-hand cooler. This happened in late September, right after Labor Day, when the parks start to empty out and the air gets that crisp edge at night. We were camping near Black Elk Wilderness in South Dakota, a spot recommended by someone I barely knew at a climbing gym. Said it was quiet and remote, but safe. That was exactly what we were looking for. A quiet break from everything. We drove up on a Friday, set up camp by early evening, and spent the first night watching stars and listening to owls in the distance. Everything felt peaceful. The kind of night that makes you forget your phone exists. The next day, we hiked for a few hours and got back to the site by late afternoon, sweaty and tired, but in a good way. I remember Liv roasting marshmallows over the little fire we built, laughing because hers kept catching fire, and I swear I've never felt more relaxed. We crawled into the tent around 10:30, zipped up, layered ourselves in sleeping bags, and dozed off almost instantly. There was no one else around. No cars, no other campers, just us in the trees. Sometime deep into the night, I woke up suddenly. You know that weird sense when you're not sure why you're awake, but your body is sure something's off? It was dead quiet. No wind, no bugs, not even distant rustling. I glanced at my watch, 3:12 a.m. Liv was still out cold next to me, wrapped like a burrito in her sleeping bag. That's when I heard it. Zzzt, soft and slow, like someone trying to be careful. It took me a second to register that the sound was coming from the tent zipper, the one right next to my head. My first thought was, raccoon, but the zipper didn't stop. It kept going, steady, deliberate. I froze. Every hair on my body stood up. My brain was scrambling to rationalize it, maybe the wind, but there was no wind. Maybe a branch snagged it? No way. It was unmistakable. Someone was unzipping our tent. I didn't say anything, didn't move, just lay there trying to breathe as silently as possible. Then, clear as day from just outside the tent, I heard a voice. Low, male, calm. He whispered, "It's open." Not excited, not angry, just informative, like someone letting someone else know they'd finished a task. And then, footsteps, faint, crunching slowly into the woods behind us. I didn't move for what felt like a full minute. My heart was pounding so hard, it made my sleeping bag feel like it had its own pulse. Liv shifted a little in her sleep, and I instinctively reached over and covered her mouth gently. Not to wake her up in a panic, but because I didn't know if we were alone yet. I strained my ears for any sound, branches snapping, leaves crunching, but everything had gone still. Again, too still. I kept replaying the voice in my head. It's open. Who the hell says something like that and then just walks off into the woods? Eventually, I whispered Liv's name just once. She stirred, confused, mumbling something about having to pee, and I hushed her quickly. I told her not to make any noise, that someone had opened our tent. Her face changed immediately, eyes wide, mouth slightly open like she was going to say something but couldn't. I grabbed my pocket knife, the only thing I had within reach, and sat up as quietly as I could. The tent was only halfway unzipped, just enough that someone could peek in if they wanted. I zipped it back up slowly, barely breathing, and told Liv to start getting dressed. Quietly. We didn't know what to do. Hiking out in the middle of the night didn't feel smart. We didn't know who, or what, was out there, and we weren't exactly near a ranger station. Cell signal had been spotty the whole day, and our phones were on airplane mode. Any way to save battery? I suggested we turn off our lantern, stay low, and listen. Maybe it was a messed up prank. Maybe someone was trying to scare us. But that whisper didn't sound playful. It sounded like someone checking something off a list, like there was a next step coming. The rest of the night dragged. Every little noise felt like a threat. At one point, we heard something, or someone, step on a dry branch not far from the tent. We held our breath until the sound faded again. I didn't sleep another second. I sat upright the whole time, knife in hand, eyes fixed on the silhouette of the zipper in the moonlight. Liv eventually drifted off out of sheer exhaustion, but I couldn't stop thinking. Why open our tent, whisper that, and then just walk away? What was supposed to happen next? As soon as the first bit of daylight filtered through the trees, I shook Liv gently and told her we were leaving. Immediately. We didn't eat, didn't make coffee, didn't even pack properly. We just shoved everything into our bags, half-zipped the tent, and started down the trail as fast as we could. I kept turning around every couple of minutes, scanning the woods, listening for anything. Footsteps, voices, that zipper sound. Nothing. But the silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like we were being watched, the kind of quiet that feels intentional. We reached the parking area just before 9 a.m. Ours was the only car there, same as when we arrived. But here's the part that still messes with me. Wedged under one of our windshield wipers was a small piece of paper torn from a notebook. No handwriting, no drawings, just a crude little circle, drawn in what looked like charcoal, with a line running straight through the center. That was it. No explanation, no context. I asked Liv if she had left it there. She hadn't even seen it, and I still have no idea what it meant, if anything. Back in town, we stopped at a ranger station to report what happened. The guy behind the desk, probably in his 50s, graying beard, real no bullshit attitude, listened politely. But the second I mentioned the tent zipper and the whisper, he went quiet. Not surprised, just thoughtful. He said something like, "We've had a few complaints like that lately, usually this time of year. No one ever gets hurt, but it's enough to scare people off." When I asked what he meant by that, he just shrugged and said, "Might be someone living out there. Off-grid types. Best not to camp alone." We haven't been camping since. I still think about that night all the time, especially that voice. The way it said, "It's open," like that was all it needed to do. And I still wonder, was that guy alone? Was someone else supposed to follow? What if I hadn't woken up? What if Liv had gotten up to pee like she almost did? There are so many tiny variables that could have made that night end completely differently. I'll never know what the hell was going on out there. But whatever it was, I'm just glad we left when we did. Story 2. This happened in late July of 2021. I was 24, freshly out of college, and trying to take advantage of that weird in-between phase before real adult life hit. Me and 3 friends, Ben, Kayla, and Josh, decided to do a 3-day backpacking trip along a lesser-known ridge in Colorado, just outside of Gunnison. It wasn't an official trail, more like a route that Ben had pieced together from topographic maps and some obscure hiking blogs. He was always the planner type, the guy who wore those zip-off hiking pants unironically. I was mostly just there for the views and the excuse to be offline for a few days. The area was remote, like no cell signal from the second we parked kind of remote. We saw 2 other cars at the base, but never ran into anyone during the hike. The first night went smoothly. Clear skies, cold air, lots of dumb jokes and cheap whiskey around a tiny fire. It wasn't until the second evening, while we were setting up camp on a rocky overlook, that something felt off. We were pitching tents near the edge of a cliffside with this incredible panoramic view of the valley below. Right around sunset, Kayla nudged me and pointed up. "Do you guys see that?" Hovering maybe 200 feet above us, dead still in the sky, was a drone. We couldn't hear it, it was too high, but the blinking red light made it obvious. None of us owned one, and we hadn't seen another soul in over 24 hours. At first, we just stared at it, kind of in awe. But then 10 minutes passed, then 15. It wasn't moving, just hovering in place like it was watching us. Ben, trying to play it cool, said someone might be filming landscape footage. But at this altitude, in the middle of nowhere, without moving for that long? Eventually, the drone drifted slightly to the left, hovered there for another minute, and then just disappeared behind a ridge. We were all unsettled, but didn't really say much about it after that. No one wanted to be the one to admit it. Creeped them out. We ate in relative silence, eyes darting up toward the sky every so often. That night, I had trouble falling asleep. I kept hearing soft, mechanical whirring sounds, though maybe it was the wind in the trees or just my mind messing with me. but Kayla swears she saw lights moving again above our tent around 2 a.m., just for a few seconds. By the time morning rolled around, we were all a little more on edge than we wanted to admit. No one had really slept well. Ben was snappy. Josh kept checking the sky like it was part of his routine, and Kayla was just unusually quiet. We ate a quick breakfast and packed up fast, trying to shake the weird vibe. But that day, while hiking, we all kept glancing over our shoulders. It was that kind of tension where no one says it out loud, but everyone feels it. Around noon, we took a break near a stream, and that's when we all heard it again. That sound. A soft, unmistakable buzzing, like a drone approaching but not visible. We scanned the tree line, the ridge behind us, even above the tree canopy, but saw nothing. It stopped just as quickly as it came. Ben tried to laugh it off and said it could have been bees or something, but the rest of us knew that sound. It was mechanical, sharp, too clean to be anything natural. The real kicker? When we made it to our next campsite later that evening, another remote outcropping a few miles east, we found fresh boot prints. Not ours, not our pattern. Someone had clearly been there recently. Deep prints, heavy steps, one pair. We hadn't passed anyone, no one had passed us. That night we barely talked. We didn't start a fire. We just sat there, huddled near our tents, trying not to let our imaginations get the best of us. But right after dark, around 9:30, it came back. This time the drone was closer, lower. We could hear it now, that faint, steady hum like a wasp caught in a jar. We looked up and saw it hovering maybe 40 feet above the trees, with no blinking lights this time. Just this black silhouette against the night sky. Kayla shined her flashlight toward it, and it zipped back, out of range, almost instantly, like it was reacting to the light. That scared the hell out of us. Drones don't usually behave like that, not unless someone's flying it live. Ben finally snapped and shouted something like, "Who the fuck is out there?" into the trees. There was no answer, no rustling, no sign of anything, just that thick silence again, as if the whole forest had gone on pause. We debated hiking out right then, but we were at least 12 miles from the car and would have had to do most of it in the dark, which felt riskier, so we made a plan to leave before sunrise. No one wanted to stay through another night. We took shifts sleeping, if you could call it that. I sat outside our tent with a headlamp and a small camping axe, staring into the dark like I expected something to step out at any second. We broke camp just before 5 a.m., in near darkness, using headlamps and trying not to speak unless necessary. The air felt heavier that morning. No wind, no bird song, just that kind of unnatural quiet that puts your nerves on edge. I kept glancing up, half expecting to see the drone above us again, but the sky stayed empty. Still, that feeling of being watched didn't go away. At one point, Kayla tripped on a root and nearly cried. Not from the fall, but just from the sheer tension. We were all on edge. I think even Ben realized that whatever we had brushed up against wasn't something to rationalize anymore. When we finally made it back to the base, our legs were shaking from both the hike and the stress. The cars were still there, ours and two others. Nothing looked tampered with. But about 10 feet from our car, on a flat slab of rock, we noticed something that hadn't been there when we arrived. A small black drone, completely smashed in, like it had been thrown or dropped from height. Next to it was a GoPro, the lens cracked, but still intact. Ben picked it up without thinking. None of us said a word. We just stood there staring at it, trying to figure out what it meant. Someone had been there, and they had left it. Later that week, Ben plugged in the GoPro at his place. Most of the files were corrupted, but one video opened, just one. It was from the second night. You could see us around our tents, the faint glow of our lantern, and the timestamp, 9:38 p.m., the exact time we'd seen the drone hovering. It was filmed from above, perfectly still. No sound, no movement, just us sitting in silence, looking paranoid and tired. And then, at the end of the 2-minute clip, the camera suddenly jolted downward as if the drone had lost control or been pulled down. The last frame was pure chaos. Dirt, rocks, a blur of movement, and then static. We never went back to that ridge. Kayla deleted her AllTrails account. Ben actually threw the GoPro into a dumpster the same day he showed us the footage. None of us really talk about it anymore, not because we're over it, but because we aren't. Whatever that was, whoever was flying that thing, they knew where we were, followed us, and got way too close. And the part that sticks with me the most? That drone wasn't just recording landscape. It was focused only on us. No sweeping shots, no transitions, just us. The kind of footage you take when you're not planning to share it. Story 3. This happened back in 2019, right before things in the world went weird. I was 31 at the time, working as a teacher in Northern California, and I used to spend a lot of weekends hiking with 2 friends from college, Jordan and Elise. Nothing too extreme, mostly state parks and longer trails that let us disconnect for a bit. That particular weekend, we went out to Big Basin Redwood State Park. It's a pretty popular spot, but we chose one of the lesser-used loop trails that cuts deep into the forest. We weren't camping overnight, just doing a day hike about 12 miles round trip. The trail started like any other. Tall trees, filtered sunlight, packed dirt underfoot. I remember the air being especially clean that day, cool, earthy, and quiet in a calming way. It was late morning when we reached a sort of clearing off trail, the kind of spot where people sometimes step aside for a break. There was a big fallen log, some pine needles scattered in odd clumps, and something about the area just felt off. I don't know how to explain it, but the vibe shifted. Elise even said, kind of jokingly, feels like we just stepped into a different park. I laughed it off, but I felt it too, like we'd passed through some invisible line. And that's when I saw them. A tiny pair of kids' shoes, maybe toddler-sized, sitting about 5 feet off the path side by side. They were scuffed, dirty, the kind of light-up sneakers that flash when you step, but they weren't flashing anymore, just sitting there. Next to them, half buried under some dry leaves, was a red sweater. No backpack, no toys, no other gear. It looked like they'd just been left there. Jordan spotted it too and walked over before I could say anything. He knelt down, touched the fabric, and then looked at me with this uneasy expression, like he expected an explanation I didn't have. At first, we wondered if someone had dumped old clothes there, or if a family had passed through and forgotten them, but it didn't make sense. There were no other signs, no food wrappers, no prints, no stroller tracks, just those tiny shoes and the sweater, sitting there like some kind of offering. Elise started to say something when we heard a noise, not loud, but sharp, like a branch snapping, maybe 20 or 30 feet into the woods. We all froze. It wasn't an animal scurrying, it was too intentional, like something or someone had stepped down hard. No one said a word. Jordan slowly stood up, eyes still locked in the direction of the noise. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, like my body had decided this moment was worth panicking over. Elise whispered, "Did you hear that?" We nodded. The forest went dead silent after that. No wind, no birds, not even the usual creak of trees swaying. Just this heavy, tense quiet. I looked back at the shoes, and something about how neatly they were placed started bothering me. Not thrown, not dropped. Set down side by side like someone had taken the time to arrange them that way. We debated for a moment what to do. Elise wanted to keep moving, said we could report it to a ranger later, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was nearby, watching. I pulled out my phone even knowing we had no signal and took a quick picture of the shoes and sweater, just in case. That's when Jordan said, "Let's flag this spot." He took a small strip of orange trail tape from his bag, tied it to a low branch, and marked the GPS location on his hiking app. It was one of those small decisions that felt important at the time, even if we didn't know why yet. We picked up the pace after that, moving quickly through the rest of the trail. But for the next hour or so, we kept hearing things. Faint, quick footsteps behind us, always just far enough that we couldn't see anything. At one point, Elise stopped and said she smelled something sweet, almost like syrup. We all sniffed the air but didn't catch anything. Then, maybe 10 minutes later, Jordan pointed out something strange. Another piece of clothing, a child's sock, hanging from a tree branch about 8 feet up. That's when it stopped. Feeling like an accident. That's when it felt like someone wanted us to see these things. By the time we got back to the parking lot, we were rattled. There were only 2 other cars there, and one of them had been there that morning when we arrived. We didn't see anyone go in or come out the whole day. We went straight to the ranger station and told them everything. The shoes, the sweater, the sock, the noise, Even the smell Elise picked up, the ranger behind the desk, an older woman with this weirdly calm demeanor, just nodded slowly. Then she asked us to show her the photo. I handed her my phone, and she stared at the picture longer than I expected. Then she said, "You didn't move anything, right?" I said no, and she just replied, "Okay, probably best if you don't mention this to other hikers." We stood there, kind of stunned. Jordan asked her what she meant by that. Why wouldn't we mention it? And that's when her tone shifted. She looked at us, then around the station, lowered her voice and said, "Look, we've had incidents, reports like yours. Things left in the woods, always kids stuff. People hearing things, feeling watched. But when we send someone out, there's never anything there. No one missing, no open cases. It's like the forest just resets." Her words hung in the air in this uncomfortable way. Elise looked at me like she wanted to leave right now. And we did. We thanked the ranger and got out of there fast. That car ride home was dead quiet. All of us were processing, but no one knew what to say. I kept replaying the layout in my head. The shoes, the sweater, the sock in the tree, and wondering how long those things had been out there, who they belonged to, why they were so deliberately placed. A part of me still thought maybe it was just a messed up prank, but the look on that ranger's face didn't feel like someone dealing with a prank. It felt like someone who knew more than she could say, and had decided it was safer not to talk about it. I still have that photo. I've looked at it probably 100 times. Zoomed in on the shoes, the ground around them, the shadows in the trees. Nothing ever pops out. Nothing obviously wrong. But every now and then I get this gnawing feeling like I'm missing something just outside the frame. Like the real story isn't what we saw, but what we didn't. I even tried calling the ranger station a few weeks later, but the woman we spoke to, no one seemed to know who I was talking about. "We rotate shifts a lot," they said. "Might have been someone just filling in. We've gone on other hikes since then, but never back to Big Basin. And we avoid the side trails now." I still think about that day more than I'd like to admit, how close we came to something we didn't understand. Whatever was happening out there, it was real. And it was intentional. Maybe it still is. Story 4. I've been solo camping for years. It's kind of my reset button whenever life gets too loud. I'm 36 now, but this happened when I was 33, right after I'd gone through a rough breakup and needed space from, well, everything. I picked a spot I'd never tried before, remote state forest land up in northern Minnesota. No official campsite, just me, my gear, and the trees. I wasn't trying to find peace or do some spiritual healing. I just wanted silence. The kind you only get when your phone's dead and you're miles away from anyone who knows your name. The first day was uneventful, which is exactly how I like it. Hiked in about 6 miles, found a spot with a bit of elevation, and set up my tarp between 2 thick pines. Made a small fire, ate jerky and instant mashed potatoes, read for a while, then turned in early. It was cold, but I was layered up and used to it. I didn't hear a single sound all night, no animals, no wind, not even distant water. It was the kind of stillness that makes you feel like you're the only person left on Earth. I slept solid, no weird dreams, no waking up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, just calm. The next morning is when things started to feel off. I unzipped my sleeping bag, stepped outside to pee, and noticed immediately that my firewood wasn't where I left it. I always stack it in a triangle, partly for airflow, partly because I'm a little OCD with camp setup, but now it was in a neat square, and the pieces were arranged from biggest to smallest. It was so precise, I actually laughed at first. Thought maybe I'd done it myself and forgot. Then I looked at my knife. I'd left it, sheathed and clipped to my pack strap. Now it was stuck upright in a tree trunk about 5 feet away, like someone had slammed it in with force. That's when I stopped laughing. I stood there, barefoot, just staring at the tree. It wasn't a casual placement. It wasn't a joke. The blade was buried at an angle, too clean to be random. My first instinct was to scan the tree line, see if anyone was nearby, but there was nothing, just birds and trees and my own breath fogging in the cold. I called out, "Hello?" More out of instinct than hope. No answer. I kept turning in circles, waiting to see movement or hear twigs snapping, but there was nothing. No footprints around the camp, no snapped branches, no signs of animals. Just that perfect little wood pile and my knife, staring back at me like a message I couldn't read. I started convincing myself it had to be someone messing with me. A hunter maybe, or another camper just playing some twisted joke. But this wasn't a campsite with neighbors. This was middle-of-nowhere forest, and I hadn't seen a single soul since I left the trailhead. I even walked the perimeter of my camp looking for tracks. The ground was soft enough that any boot print should have left a mark, but there was nothing. No cigarette butts, no wrappers, no signs of someone sitting nearby watching. Just clean forest floor and that creeping feeling crawling up my spine. I spent the rest of that morning trying to act normal. Boiled some water for coffee, sharpened a stick for later, read a bit. But I couldn't shake the tension. You know when your body knows something's wrong before your mind accepts it? That low, buzzing tension in the back of your skull? That's how I felt the whole time. Around noon, I walked a couple miles deeper into the woods, just to see if I could spot any other campsites or hikers. Still nothing. It was like I'd stepped into a sealed-off pocket of forest that no one else knew existed. When I got back, I almost turned around and walked right back out. My tarp had been adjusted. Not taken down, not trashed, just tightened. Perfectly retied at the corners with cleaner knots than I'd made myself. My gear, which I'd left spread out on a log bench I made the night before, had been reorganized. Everything folded, stacked, even my socks laid out flat like someone had taken inventory. And right in the middle of it all, a tiny square of brown paper, torn, not cut. Written on it in pencil in tight block letters was just one sentence. Stay warm. My mouth went dry. It was such a small sentence, but it hit harder than if someone had screamed in my face. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't aggressive. It was familiar. Like whoever it was had been watching, quietly, politely, and decided to interact, just a little. I couldn't decide what was worse, the idea that someone was nearby right now, or the possibility that they'd been there all night, standing in the dark while I slept, rearranging my things like they belonged there. I didn't even pack. I just shoved everything into my pack, tore the knife out of the tree, and started hiking out without looking back. The hike back to my car was the longest 3 hours of my life. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, or to see movement in my peripheral vision. Nothing happened, but that somehow made it worse. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was loaded. I didn't even stop to eat or drink, just pushed through the trail like my life depended on it. When I finally got back to the dirt parking area, my car was exactly how I left it. No notes, no scratches, no signs that anyone had followed me. But I still felt like I was being watched as I threw my pack in the trunk. For weeks after that, I couldn't sleep right. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 a.m. feeling like someone had just been in the room. My apartment started to feel too open, like there weren't enough locks between me and the world. I never reported it. What was I supposed to say? Someone politely reorganized my gear in the woods? Even now, when I tell friends about it, they just sort of nod and say something like, "Creepy man," and move on. But I felt it. Whoever it was, they were comfortable out there. Silent, confident, close enough to watch me sleep, close enough to touch my things. And I never even heard them. I still camp, but not alone anymore, and never in the same place twice. I always bring extra lights, a personal alarm, sometimes even a trail cam. But part of me knows that if someone really wants to be there, if they know the woods better than I ever will, none of that matters. They could be 20 feet away, behind a tree, watching, waiting, making quiet little decisions about whether or not to say something, or just leave a message. And when I think back on that note, "Stay warm," I still don't know if it was meant as kindness or a warning. Story 5. This happened to me and a friend back in 2020, during one of those weird stretches of the pandemic where no one really knew what to do with themselves. I was living in Montana at the time, and my buddy Owen had just driven up from Boise to spend a long weekend hiking. We'd been best friends since high school. He's the type that laughs in serious moments. I'm the one always overthinking everything. We wanted somewhere remote, somewhere without masks or news alerts or anything human, honestly. Owen suggested a spot his uncle used to hunt in the Beartooth Mountains. Not an official trail, just wilderness. We hiked in, maybe 6-7 miles with our packs, taking it slow, stopping often. It was the kind of place where the landscape swallows sound. Pines stretched tall and tight, and the air felt heavy with pine and silence. We found this amazing clearing late in the afternoon, a natural bowl with a ridge line behind us, and a small creek about 200 feet downhill, perfect for the night. We set up camp, made some food, cracked a couple of warm beers, and watched the light start to shift across the trees. Remember saying, "This place feels untouched," and I meant it. It felt like we were the first people to breathe there in years. About an hour before sunset, Owen got really quiet. He was sitting on a rock, looking up at the ridge behind us, just kind of squinting. I asked him what was up and he didn't answer right away. Then he said, "There's a guy up there." I turned and looked, and sure enough, there was a silhouette. Tall, still, maybe 300 yards up, just standing there. Not hiking, not walking, just watching. I immediately got that twisting feeling in my gut, like when you realize you've forgotten to lock your front door, but you're already in bed. We both stared for a minute, trying to decide if it was really a person or just a trick of the light. But then he shifted, just a little, and we knew. We waved. That was Owen's idea. He raised his arm like it was no big deal, gave a casual "hey there" kind of gesture. The figure didn't wave back, didn't move, just kept standing there, arms by his side facing our direction. At first we tried to come up with explanations. Maybe it was a ranger or another hiker who'd lost the trail. But what ranger doesn't respond? And what hiker just stands there like that for minutes on end? The sun dipped lower and the guy didn't move a muscle. It was like watching a statue that might come to life at any second. We tried to ignore it for a while, sat back down, forced some small talk, kept looking over our shoulders every couple minutes. But the guy was still there, still just watching. I remember feeling this weird guilt, like we were intruding on his space, even though we had every right to be there. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, and that's when he disappeared. Not walked away, just gone. One moment he was standing there, the next we looked back and the ridge was empty. It was like he melted into the tree line. That moment hit me hard. I felt my stomach drop. I remember looking at Owen and seeing my own fear, mirrored back. We debated hiking out right then, but it would have meant navigating miles of rough terrain in the dark with flashlights and bad footing. We were stuck, so we built up the fire higher than usual and stayed close. Owen had a little hatchet he kept near his sleeping bag, and I had my knife tucked in my hoodie pocket. We didn't joke anymore, didn't drink. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves made us sit up straight, scanning the dark. Around midnight, we heard something up on the ridge again. Not footsteps exactly, but movement. Slow, deliberate, something pacing. Neither of us moved. We just listened. It would stop, then start again, like whoever it was circling the edge of the ridge, keeping just out of sight. The worst part was, it didn't sound like it was moving away. It was staying with us, matching our position. We sat like that for over an hour. Eventually, it stopped completely, and we waited another hour just to be sure. Finally, Owen mumbled, if he wanted to do something, he would have already. I didn't say it out loud, but I was thinking the same thing. Or he's waiting for us to fall asleep. We took shifts after that. Owen stayed up while I dozed for maybe 20 minutes at a time, then we'd switch. We made it to sunrise. When the light started coming back, we packed up in record time. As we took down the tent, I walked behind the big boulder that had blocked our view of the ridge. There, in the dirt, were cigarette butts. Still fresh, still, smelling of smoke, and boot prints, deep, wide-spaced, like someone had been walking back and forth for hours, just watching our campsite from above. We didn't speak much on the hike back, just kept our heads down and moved fast. Neither of us wanted to admit how scared we were, but it was obvious. We practically jogged the last mile to the car. Once we got there, we checked the area, half expecting to see someone else's vehicle, maybe even a tent tucked off the road. But ours was the only car in, so the lot, just us. Owen walked a full circle around it, scanning the trees before getting in. That alone told me everything I needed to know about how freaked out he was. He never does stuff like that. That drive back was quiet. I remember watching the woods through the side mirror, waiting to see movement. Some glimpse of a figure tucked between the trees. Nothing. We talked about it a few weeks later, tried to joke it off, called him the Watcher, like it was some campfire story, but neither of us has camped that deep again since. And here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. I looked up historical campsites near that ridge a few months after, trying to figure out if maybe there had been someone living up there. What I found instead was a short thread in a forgotten local hiking forum from 2017. Someone had posted about seeing a man standing on that exact ridge, watching, not moving, not responding. Same spot, same story. It still makes me wonder, how many others has he seen? How long has he been up there? And why does he never come closer?